O Timbrel Vault, Staircase, a lo mejor. Nada. En realidad eso es una traducción que se inventó un valenciano que llegó a la labor. Y como una manera de decir la de panderete, dijo, pues pandereta, él mismo, o sea, que no se ve. En realidad es una traducción un poco chapuza, pero es la que se usa. Vamos, que es que yo pensé, ¿por qué se dirá pandereta? Y luego pensé por el panderete que está en español seguro. Que lo tradujeron así. Bueno. Buenos días a todos. Bien, hoy, como podéis imaginar, pues tenemos circunstancias especiales. Veis que no hay mucha gente en la sala. Es porque hay un aforo restringido. La mayor parte del público nos está siguiendo por internet.
Well, good morning. We are streaming live, and there's a lot of people following us from home, so we really have to stick to the schedule. First of all, I would like to thank you all for being with us today. Let me introduce, first of all, Manuel Blanco, who is the director of the School of Architecture. Who's always supported us in these events ever since the first one that was held in 2012. Well, it's a great honor for the School of Architecture to host this conference.
Ok, da capo.
So it's a great honor for the School of Architecture to host this conference, to welcome Rafael at his home.
Timeless architecture is, how to say it, is one of the branch of the architectural thought, and one of the branch of the architectural thought that thinks about the future, thinking about what the past was and what the past is, and how the lessons that can be learned from the past can be here. Very recently, I was thinking a lot of you. I was telling Rafael, I was visiting the Royal Alcázares de Sevilla, and I was thinking how Rafael could put the Royal Alcázars in the state that they are now, something that we can recognize. And at the same time, I was also thinking, I was visiting, and like I'm going to make a special comment, I cannot say what was the work and who was the author. A piece that was trying to make something like the old palaces of the old times, and suddenly the axis was wrong. And going from one room to the other one, the axis was not well because the ceiling was bad. And I was thinking that in the Congress of Timeless Architecture wouldn't be accepted because Rafael would have killed them. Sorry, because the lessons of the past are being taught because we have to make a sustainable world. Now, von der Leyen, the president of the European Commission, is talking about the new Bauhaus, but she's talking about creativity, she's talking about beauty, she's talking about an architecture that is sustainable. And that's the architecture that we have had all through the history and that we have to recover also. So, good works, and I hope to see you again next year here, because that means also that we will survive this pandemic in these very difficult times. Thank you, Alejandro, for inviting us. Thank you, Javier, for being here once again with us. Javier is really one of us. He has only one problem for me. He never accepted to be a professor of my school.
Muchas gracias. Bueno. Bien, interviene a continuación Robert Adam, presidente.
Next is Robert Adam, chairman of INTBAU UK and chairman of the jury of the Rafael Manzano Prize for Traditional Architecture. It's a great honor for me to be here with you and see everyone's faces. Metaphysically speaking, I must say that there is no such thing as a timeless thing, because the passage of time is inevitable, but timeless in this means lasting in terms of material and socially, and more importantly, sustainable. I'm sure that we will have a very interesting conference, so thank you very much. Thank you, Robert. José Baganya, chairman of INTBAU Portugal, will take the floor next. By the way, if you want simultaneous translation, you can get Thank you, Alejandro. Good morning, everyone. And I would like to greet everyone and thank, on behalf of myself and all of my colleagues and friends of INTBAU Portugal, who I represent, to the organization of this seminar, the School of Architecture of Madrid, INTBAU Spain, and all of the organizers, the members of the INTBAU of the Driehaus Charitable Lead Trust. I would like to thank them for the invitation, especially in the company of my dear friend, Professor Javier Zenica Zelaya, who is a very dear friend of mine. After so many lockdowns, so many anxieties and heartaches, exercising our profession, communicating through computer screens. It's good to be here and meeting face to face again. Nothing can match this way of interaction. And it is part of our nature as human beings. I sincerely hope that we will not be in lockdown anytime soon, because times are hard, and I think we really need to do more and much better than we have done so far, because it seems to me that we have not learned much from the mistakes that this pandemic has brought to light more clearly. And many mistakes were made and need to be corrected. And one of the lessons we can draw from this crisis, which is not yet over, is that the knowledge of our urban architecture and constructive traditions, with the rich variety and multiple singularities, constitutes an invaluable and precious heritage for a healthier life, and I would even say for the preservation of our existence as a species. At the speed at which our species is growing, and with the environmental problems that we face, either we stop building buildings and cities based on the industrial logic that has dominated us so far, or we are doomed. And I very much hope that the situation is quite difficult. There's no going back. Change is an emergency, a must for all of us. And in this sense, organizations like INTBAU fight for this goal. And we should, and the work of these organizations should be reinforced. It is within this structure that I framed these seminars organized by colleagues, more particularly I'm not going to mention all of the organizers. I hope you will have a very fruitful and interesting session. José Bagagna was the first Portuguese architect to win the Rafael Montana Prize, and Javier Zenica Zelaya was also a laureate winner of the Rafael Montana Prize. We have a few laureates in the room. Javier Zenica Zelaya is the chairman of INTBAU Spain, and he's a professor of architectural design at the University of the Basque Country. Well, thank you, Alejandro. It is a great honor for me to be here. It is a great honor to have been invited to this event, to this conference, and also I am fortunate to be surrounded by very good friends and masters like Rafael Manzano, Miguel Blanco, the director of the school. All of us are professors in different schools of architecture, but first and foremost, we are friends, and it's a great honor for me to call myself their friend. And of course, I would like to make a special mention of Professor Robert Adam, who is the creator of INTBAU, a network with a presence in more than 40 countries, and patron of 400 different non-profit organizations all over the world. And of course, we also have José Bagagna here, the chairman of INTBAU Portugal. And so it's a great honor for me to be surrounded by all of these dear colleagues, we will soon be announcing a recent publication by INTBAU made at the request of the regional Basque government. We were asked to re-edit a catalog of neoclassical architecture that was produced some years ago. There were some budget cuts, and we just focused on the cataloging of buildings. This was so called the Atlas of Neoclassical Architecture. This is the most recent initiative of INTBAU Spain. And even more recently, we have published, and there's a shortage of raw materials, as you know, paper and cardboard. So this process is taking longer than expected, but we are about to open an exhibition about a Bilbao-born architect of an excellent quality whose works can be found all over Spain. He's not very well known though. His name is Manuel Galíndez. A book was published thanks to the initiative of a San Francisco publishing house, and the heading of this group of publications is Great Architects of the 20th Century, and hopefully this will not be the first issue of this publication, because there are many architects who fall within this category. Finally, we have published, together with the collaboration of Alejandro and the support of Professor Manzano and many other colleagues, we have recently published a publication dedicated to Donald Gray, an Australian architect who was in love with Andalusia. He lived in Andalusia most of his life, and he made some beautiful projects in Andalusia. He passed away a few years ago, but the book we've published in his memory is an absolute beauty, and I fully recommend it. So that's all. I'd like to thank the organizers for the invitation. It's a great pleasure for me to be here, and I hope you all continue to support the work of INTBAU, because the purpose of this non-profit organization is to promote reasonable living, protection of the heritage, and the defense and preservation of all building arts. Regarding the book on Donald Gray, at the Rafael Montana Prize YouTube channel, there's a beautiful video on Donald Gray, an interview. He explained the way he worked, the way he sought to recover lost building trades, and it's really a very interesting video. Finally, Rafael Montana will take the floor. He was awarded the Richard Driehaus International Architecture Prize in 2010. He is the first and only Spanish architect to win this prize. Thanks to Rafa's work, Richard Driehaus fell in love with Spain and Spanish architecture and launched the Rafael Manzano Prize, which then was extended in its coverage to include Portugal. By the way, Richard Driehaus passed away recently, and it is the first year we are meeting without him. Well, thank you very much for your very kind words. Dear director of my school, it is a great pleasure for me to visit the school once a year, because this is like christening myself once again every year. This is my alma mater. And I think this really emphasizes that there is a spirit, that this is really the spirit of this school that has touched upon me. There is certain beauty behind every period of time, and it is especially moving for me to remember Richard Driehaus, a US national who, for whatever unknown reason, chose me to name the prize for traditional architecture, Rafael Manzano Prize. And this is the first year we will be presenting this prize without the presence of his creator, Mr. Driehaus. He has guaranteed the continuity of this prize, but sadly he is no longer with us because he could not guarantee his own continued existence. The director of the school has mentioned my restoration of the Real Alcázar. I have a pen drive with me with a few photographs and drawings that reveal some secrets behind my work. One of my sorrows in recent years is the loss of many dear friends, especially Richard Driehaus, of course, whom I miss terribly. And of course, I also have to mention Leon Greer, who is just another Spanish resident these days. He lives in Mallorca, and he's a really he's a strong militant and activist in the defense of traditional architecture. Well, thank you, Rafael. This seminar, this conference, is sponsored by INTBAU with the collaboration of the School of Architecture, our host today. For those of you who have not attended these conferences in its earlier editions, thanks to Richard Driehaus, we have not only organized the Rafael Manzano Prize, but several building arts awards. We have a few winners of these awards in the audience, and hopefully future winners of these awards. These are known as the Richard Driehaus Building Arts Awards. We also have a architecture competition convened by the Ministry of Transport, Mobility and Urban Agenda, the former Ministry of Development, that the call for entries has been announced very recently. So if you're interested in participating, do not hesitate to submit your bids or your entries for the competition. All of this is organized as part of the activities of the INTBAU network, INTBAU seeks to disseminate all of these initiatives all over the world. And that is really what INTBAU is all about. It's a way of getting to know each other, exchanging information, and learn from each other. And this is free. I mean, being a membership in INTBAU is completely free of charge, so I'm not trying to sell you anything. There are many interesting initiatives stemming from the INTBAU network, such as the recent exhibition at the City Council of Madrid, at the Centro, exhibition on timeless architecture, the summer schools in Spain and Portugal, 2-week courses. Next year it will take place at the Azores Island. So as I was saying, during the first week, we analyzed the tradition of the site, drawing some sections of street, construction details, and some construction craftsmen are invited to explain their method of work, the use of local materials. And on the second week, we just prepare projects in collaboration with the city to discuss some of the needs that they have, and the basis of the proposals we come up with are based on the knowledge that we have drawn during the first week. We also have other activities such as the Tarachidia initiative, but there is a session, or rather a presentation, about this in a few minutes. So I'm not going to go into detail. So thank you very much, and apologies for the technical issues we've had.
¿Tenemos más micrófonos de estos o ya no hay más? Bien, a continuación.
Well, the first presentation speakers are Carmen Moreno and Marta Colmenares, colleagues at Tarachidia, and an association founded in 2012 by a group of colleagues and friends, the purpose of which is to keep that knowledge alive. Initially, we did not have a location for this initiative, but rather trying to find locations where we could just help spread that knowledge that we were interested in locally and globally. The main programs of Tarachidia, and these have been located on an oasis in Morocco, the Ben Hamid oasis, south of the Dra Valley of the Dra, where there are 12 different towns in which Tarachidia has been operating these last summers.
¿No va? No. Pues esto es más complicado. ¿Y para ir pasando así?
Justamente de aquí detrás.
A ver si puede mi hermana poner.
Ahora, vale.
Ahora alguien lo está manejando. ¿No?
Sí, ahora sí. Si podemos pasar Claro. Pantalla completa. Claro. Abajo, abajo, abajo. No sé quién lo está haciendo. Está haciendo Carmen, yo creo. No,
Más abajo, más abajo.
Ahí.
¿Y se puede pasar con el teclado?
A ver. Sí.
Perfecto. Vale.
Bueno, si quieres...
Pues,
Bueno, pues... uy, que tengo que hablar aquí, claro. No me puedo ir.
Thank you very much, Alejandro. I'll be discussing the Tarachidia project in the Benjamin Oasis. I'll give you some context and background, and then my colleague will be describing our actions in more detail. So this is Morocco, the Mohammed Oasis, the last one in the Dra Valley, very close to Algeria, at the doors of the Sahara Desert. This is from Google Maps, no Photoshop, no editing. We see a green line, which is the valley, the Dra Valley. The Dra is a river basin extending 200 kilometers, and then in the end the oasis, and then the Atlantic Ocean. This is a lifeline where there's water, there's life, and there are people and populations or villages. What's an oasis? It's a place, a remote place with a peculiarity in the desert, the presence of water without which life isn't possible. But it's highly anthropomorphized. Oases are used for crops, then we have fruit trees, and in the third level, of course, we have palm trees. What everyone thinks about when we think about an oasis. These were important from Egypt. They cast shades and prevent water evaporation. This is the space structure of an oasis. This is the Mohammed Oasis. The green dots are the crops, the palm trees, and then you see some tiny villages. This is a peculiarity I'll be describing later. The population has settled in this area for a long time. These are walled enclaves. This oasis has 12 traditional houses and a new village, a new population center. This is a landscape we encounter. Architecture and building techniques are very well in line with the territory, and they are very valuable because this architecture, of course, needs to be understood as part and parcel of that landscape. On the other hand, the landscape would not be like it is without the population living there and changing it, so the territory should be understood as a whole, as a unit. This is the landscape in the Dra Valley, where we have specific culture in a very fragile place, close to the Sahara Desert. This is a cultural heritage which is now endangered due to different reasons. This is the structure of the oasis, showing the buildings. These are the villages. 40 years ago, a new village was created, New Mohammed, that has nothing to do with the traditional structure of the area. It's been planned and urbanized to introduce new activities, and this has created huge imbalances. This is the new village where we have tourist areas to attract people who want to go to the desert and hire special vehicles to visit the desert. So new spaces were planned for these people, and the local administration has provided all kinds of services in this new village. So a new type of building is seen. People stop using traditional building techniques such as ramped earth. So a new model has been introduced based on concrete blocks. So the whole landscape changes, as you can imagine. And what's more, this is what we see now. The landscape has nothing to do with the land, with the place. This could be anywhere, Morocco, Peru, Bolivia, or the outskirts of any big city. It no longer has a specific character. So, traditional villages which were intertwined with the territory are no longer an alternative for the population. First and foremost, because every resource and every service is found in the new village. So people are out of a job in traditional villages. People are moving to the new village because, of course, they'll find more services and infrastructures there. So the spaces around these tiny villages are abandoned, and the area becomes part of a desert. If one thing fails, everything fails at the same time. So abandoning this way to relate to the physical environment means a huge loss of the cultural heritage, and also a loss of intangibles, building techniques, ways to relate to the landscape. So when we got there was a question in our minds: can we actually recover this cultural heritage as a tool to promote development and to fix the population in their villages? We believe that the answer is yes. We've been working in this area for more than 10 years now. So recovering cultural heritage can bring about many different advantages, as we'll see later. So this was the context, the background. And by the way, I have something else to say. We decided to take some action because some people still wish to remain in the traditional villages. They don't want to leave them. So this is the population we always work with. This is another picture, another photograph of the landscape, showing these characteristic oasis landscape buildings and houses covered by palm trees. And to the south of the oasis, we see this very beautiful and dramatic picture, dunes that move northward and swallow up what used to be crops and houses. An aerial photograph by Youssef and Benjamin Viejo, two of the villages we've focused on. We see, this photograph shows us these very compact villages with houses very close to each other, almost overlapping. And you might have noticed this red circle, the CIAT-UPM Moravito, our most recent restoration project. The structure of these settlements
la estructura urbana de los casares, veis que toda la...
So, in dark, we see the built-up areas. And very narrow streets, some of them one way, In those spaces, we find women and children mainly because these are shelter places, very cool, protected from the heat and from sandstorms. This would be a typical dwelling and its access from the alley. This is the only space, the only broad space in the village. It's not actually a square, but it's an area where different activities are carried out throughout the day. And life out in the streets, once the sun sets, is quite active. We've analyzed different dwellings there, and we see the same structure. And again, a small courtyard surrounded by the rest of the house. Like an eye looking at the sky, providing some life to the house. And around the courtyard, we have the different rooms. It's narrow and whole, so the fresh air can cool the house and then leave the house through the courtyard. The same structure we have seen is found in one of the most characteristic buildings in the oasis, the Morabout, some kind of hermitage. It's quite a discovery the first time you see it. It's one of the buildings that the local population admire and appreciate the most. Sibdi Abdullah Khalifa is buried there. He was a highly respected man in the oasis in one of the villages. Apparently, he had special ties with Allah, and they also tell you that if you have a headache, you should go to this place. It's highly protected and sheltered in the shade, most of it. So what you see in the picture is actually what you find inside this building. I mean, outside the building is tremendously hot, so stepping into this building for a few minutes, it's quite refreshing and calming. I'm going to show you now how, I'm going to describe our intervention in collaboration with the University of Liverpool, more specifically with Arquia, a research group led by Jamila Quattrone. We had 2 campaigns with local participants and workers. As Marta mentioned, the local is very important for us in the broadest sense of the word. Local because of the interest of the territory itself, the links with the materials and building techniques, with the landscape, with the place. This is the culture of the place itself, including artistic manifestations, music, and gastronomy. So, as far as we can, we tend to promote all of these activities. Artisan women, in our opinion, are tremendously interesting. I mean, it's a must for us to use local labor, and also for older masters who know about these techniques to share them with young people so that those techniques and trades are never lost. So in this struggle to perpetuate this knowledge and expertise, we also work with people from other places. So we had one campaign in February, the second one in October, with some 35 people from other countries, plus 10 to 12 local masters, building masters. Once again, this is the structure of Oyuleblu itself, the village, and the building I was talking about, that's some 200 meters away. It's quite tiny, 40 square meters, more or less. And it has a very low door, access door, close to a cemetery where the Marabou's family is buried. We feel very little when we step into the Marabou. You have to crouch. I mean, you have, it's a very tiny door. And the lines shown there is the tomb, the grave, and the cemetery of his family. It was quite deteriorated, especially the domes. They're parabolic. I mean, inside they were perfectly okay, but in the outside, a lot of cement had been used for rendering purposes, so the rendering had burst. It was cracked. Other areas in the facade were also very deteriorated. There's a main dome here, and then 4 additional domes, 1 in each corner. And they use traditional formwork with tamarisco leaves and rammed earth. In that formwork, we identified lots of problems. We had to restore 2 of them completely, but the other 2 were okay, were in good condition. And as to the domes, we had to take care of the rendering, because the vault inside was in a very good condition. There were lots of stains because, of course, there were water leaks that were damaging the material inside the building. Look at the windows. They're tiny, just like tiny holes, very narrow, to filter out the light.
Siempre es de penumbra.
But you're always in the shade inside this building. The walls inside were pretty dirty, full of black stains due to candles. I mean, people use candles there. And the stains are a result of the activities carried out inside this building, so we didn't want to remove them completely. We also took care of the wall around the building. It had partially collapsed, so we restored them. This is the local master, the back of the local master, together with one of the participants who's learning the technique. So we split the participants into different groups, focused on some trade, formwork, this and that, rendering, plastering, and every day they can practice different techniques. And thus we can make some progress. So adobe of different sizes based on our needs. We use these bricks for the restoration of the ceiling. Or we can exchange these bricks with the neighbors, because of course they might be dry or not so dry based on the temperature. So this is a very low corridor that leads to the building that we also restored. There were some decorations on the upper part of the door, so we decided to restore the formwork, but not all the way to the building, to create some kind of hole or gap through which the light might filter, allowing us to admire the decorations. So instead of using palm leaves, in this case, we decided to use weed.
De barro.
We decided to use reed. You buy reed carpets and you can repurpose them for this. These 2 girls came from Liverpool. They're part of the Liverpool team. They're documenting everything. Obviously, we had documented the whole building, before the restoration, but in February, during the February workshop, these two women documented everything comprehensively. We see up on the roof another building master that's plastering the domes, who's plastering the domes that were quite deteriorated, as is the junction between the facade and the ceiling or the roof. This is the end result of the restoration of one of the domes. This is the central dome from the inside. They're paraboloid in shape. They don't actually work as a vault, as a dome. This one is quite different, as you can see here. Some wood elements are here. Some wood elements are used here to move from the square shape to the round shape. It is not a parabolic dome, as you can see. And the decoration is very simple, as you can appreciate in this picture. Very, very simple, but very beautiful too. So the finished domes, and this is part of the team in action. Different participants working with the master builders who are teaching them how to plaster the wall. And other photographs showing the different stages of the work. The locals actually were quite interested in our activities, as is usually the case. If there's some activity, people flock there to see what is going on. So people would approach us and ask us questions and share their opinions with us. It was very interesting. So these are the adobe bricks we built, which we sometimes exchange for the population, with the local population, as I said before. We preserved the original structure and the original size and shapes. There were two gargoyles, which of course we preserved. So we treated this area with mortar and lime. And this is a result of our work in the door, in the access door to the Moabite. So the University of Liverpool produced a documentary, a beautiful documentary, if I may say so. It's called Mohammed, the last oasis in Morocco. And of course we also documented everything, as we usually do. So thank you very much.
Hay preguntas, no sé si me
Bueno, muchísimas.
Thank you so much.
Ahora sí, ¿no? ¿Se oye?
Thank you so much. If you'd like to see the video or to join one of our courses, it's very, you can join Bauer. You will be receiving all the information you need, or just write to us. If you're interested, you'll be welcome. We have a course, an upcoming course in January. After each presentation, we have a Q&A. We have some time for the Q&A. Guillermo or Carolina, perhaps you can hand the microphone to those who want to ask questions. Leopoldo? Good morning, and thank you very much. Very interesting. It was actually fantastic. I must confess I was in love with Tarachidia based on what Alejandro had explained about it. But I have a very specific question. Do you have any age limits to go to Tarachidia? No. You can be as old as 150. I'm afraid I'm older than that. I am 70. And a 70-year-old guy saying that he wants to learn perhaps might be misunderstood, because I've had time enough to learn things. This is not just tourism, or it's not a hobby. So if you go there, can you actually lend a hand? Can you actually help? Yes, we welcome people from all over the world with different interests and different backgrounds. People who just want to learn the local techniques and the way to relate to the environment. That's wonderful. And since I still have the microphone, I'm going to ask a second question. Adobe, I guess, can be made using different techniques. Is it the same that has always been used in Castile? Is it mixed with a special ingredient? And what about rammed earth? What about the building methods? Are they identical to those that we find in Spain in traditional villages? We have as many rammed earth techniques and adobe techniques as we have villages. But adobe is essentially the same as well as rammed earth. However, the soil there is quite peculiar. And also the way they use rammed earth is not identical to the one we find in Spain, but it's quite similar, and it makes sense, of course. It makes sense, yes. So, congratulations. What about the thickness of the rammed earth? And I mean, looking at the pictures, I get the feeling that you just made the adobe bricks and just left them there to dry in the sun without any oven or any other kind of machinery. Do you use any kind of a straw, I mean an additional material, straw or something else, to bind it together? Yes, straw is also used, everything is mixed together. Mud and straw. We usually manufacture two different types of bricks, a small one and a larger one for pillars or specific elements. But of course you need two hands to lift it, because it's as big as a concrete block, 40 by 20 centimeters. It's heavier. And what about the pavements, the slabs? Well, I guess the floor is not paved, right? It's just rammed earth. Yes, it's rammed earth. And then, of course, inside the house, you'll find lots of carpets that they move from one space to another. But usually there is no flooring whatsoever, just packed rammed earth. So how do you place the adobe bricks while they're still wet or dry? They use them a lot in California. Also for insulation purposes. I mean, it comes from Mexico. When in Mexico, they have a deep-rooted culture based, I mean, adobe culture. And they're quite big. The slabs, 50 by 30 or something like that. They're quite big and very heavy. Because they're installed whilst wet. But it provides that wetness, provides the material with a lot of compactness, and also binds the different elements together. you need to make sure that it doesn't dry out very quickly, because it might crack or just crumble down. It's very hot, so you need to take care. But if you install them while wet, I believe it's better. I've used this technique in LA. I mean, it's very clear that it's a Hispanic tradition, not a local tradition.
En primer lugar, muchas gracias, me ha parecido muy interesante. Os quería preguntar...
Well, thank you very much for this presentation. I found very interesting. I understood that you always respect local techniques and trades, but perhaps based on your European knowledge, or based on your updated knowledge, perhaps you might have identified some areas for improvement, right? I'm referring to the local trade, the local techniques that you aim, that you always respect. Of course, some things can be improved. In the roofing, for instance, we identified many issues. So, as experts, we do propose some improvements. The slope of the roof, for the water to drain. We don't introduce any new building techniques. We see what they have there, what it works, what it doesn't work, and we do make proposals should we identify some issue or faulty execution. Well, in some villages, they're better at some things than in others. Perhaps you learn something in a village that's not implemented in a different village, so you share them with that. You share it with them. You discuss it, of course. But if something works very well in one village, you may export it to a different village. We learn a lot because we always find a master building that knows how to do something that no one else can do. So thank you so much for this very interesting presentation. It was beautiful. I have a question for you. Have you found any colored elements? I mean, everything was beautiful. Everything you've showed us, but it was monochrome, ochres. Did you find any traces of color or not? Especially on wood. The formwork, the flooring is usually, I mean, the formwork is usually decorated, and the doors as well. We found traces of bright colors, geometrical shapes on the doors, but not on the walls. Not on the walls, no. The most commonly used material, of course, is earth. Everything has the same color. Everything is built with the same material. So that's why you found the picture's a bit monochrome. Yeah, it's the same shades, the same hues.
La zona más expuesta, ¿no? Por la lluvia.
Because they used lime to protect the wall from the rain and the elements. I'm sorry, but he's not using the microphone. No. I mean, on the top they use lime mortar to protect it. It's quite thick. Good morning. Thank you very much for such an interesting presentation. Congratulations, by the way. I seem to have understood that the domes were No, we worked with a master builder who uses lime, the only one who knows how to render lime. The domes were covered with a lime plaster. I have another question. I mean, you explained that you've been there for about 10 years. During these 10 years, have you, I mean, the locals, have they changed their attitude, their mindset? Do they value their traditional villages more? Or do they still prefer those very new villages built with concrete blocks? And during your restoration work, does it also include, I don't know, electrical wiring and things like that? Yeah, in these 10 years, of course, the local population are more and more interested in their traditional villages and buildings. Suddenly they see people from all over the world, up to 30 different countries, who go there to study their architecture, their heritage, and their landscape. And that, of course, is quite encouraging for them. And they do value their heritage more. Tourism in the past had a lot to do with the desert. It was focused on the desert, overlooking this cultural heritage, but now we see guides followed by groups, and they show them the villages and tell them some details about them, so people are understanding more and more that that's a very valuable heritage. I mean, we tend to refurbish things in public spaces that would benefit the whole population. We don't refurbish private buildings or dwellings. Infrastructure, yes. We have acted, I mean, we've worked in public infrastructures. Sewage and water treatment. Of course, people should be able to live as they want to live. So we've been involved in infrastructure projects as well, but not in private dwellings. We also organized meetings with tourist guides and tourist associations. We also published some tourist guides available in every hotel in the area. So that has been quite successful, let me tell you.
And I'm really happy that we're not just sharing the passion for Earth, but we're also sharing the same award. So congratulations again. And about your, decision not to add anything, I think that's really wonderful, because anything that we add to this fantastic material is just harming the circularity. And if we had to invent a new material, that is so good in recycling without any loss of quality, that has this ability to balance the humidity, is load-bearing, etc., that would be a difficult task to do. So adding anything would just hurt the quality of the mud. And I mean, throughout the works that I did, also together with Martin Rau, who is probably one of the most experienced earth builders, we have built in high-tech, we have built in low-tech, and the quality is always the same. So it's absolutely not needed to add anything. It's just always, our mindset that things, we have to conquer new things, we have to add something, to kind of do something against the vulnerability. But in fact, the vulnerability towards water is the biggest asset and potential of Earth, because that enables the recyclability of that material. So I'm just thinking, you're just super on the right track. And thank you so much for all the work, the fantastic work that you're doing.
Sí, algo importante también es que esta manera de trabajar lo que hace es dejar la mayor parte de nuestro presupuesto en el lugar.
Yes, this way of working just leaves most of the budget on site. Because all of the materials stay in place And well, that is, the rest is just for the accommodation. Yes, of course, when you do not source local materials, of course, the budget changes. You have to spend most of the budget in sourcing these materials from elsewhere. So this way, we just benefit the local economy. And if we use cement blocks, there would be just a few hours of skilled work, just a few hours for those that would put them in place, and this would not require any special skill, but this way people feel proud of the work and they feel proud of the fact that this contributes a very special value to these projects. What was the maximum age to participate in Tarachidia's initiative? Could you elaborate a little bit on this? We are going to organize the next workshop in January, from the 22nd to 26th of January, and everyone is welcome. Everybody's welcome. If you're interested, just sign up. There's just a minimum age requirement. 18, no maximum age limit. Well, on our first visit to Tarachidia, we thought, well, just think about how many times has this earth been a part of the buildings. And of course, it's a countless number of times. And this is really a great example of the singularity of these type of constructions.
Guillermo nos dice que ya.
Es la hora.
Pues muchas gracias a todos.
Gracias.
Well, next is Anna Hedinger. Many of you will be familiar with her work. She's doing extraordinary work in the rehabilitation, reconstruction of rammed earth structures. We met in Brussels because Tarachidia and Anna received the Rotier Prize.
Yeah, thank you very much for the invitation. I'm very happy to be here, and I really enjoyed the first presentation a lot. Oh, I have to stand here. So architecture to me is a tool to improve lives. Unfortunately, also the opposite is true. Architecture can destroy. But I firmly believe we, as architects, we can do better than now. We deal with a lot of resources, with a lot of money also, that gives us a lot of responsibility, but also power for change. And architecture is really a powerful tool for change. And I believe we can build not just structures, but we also can build up good communities. And I think that's a wonderful thing that we can do with architecture. So is there somewhere, how do I... So this picture shows a study trip I did with my students from ETH Zurich a couple of years ago. It was the end of October. It was super cold. It was still frost on the ground at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And I surprised the group with the fact that I had not booked any hut or accommodation for the night, and that it was a challenge to build your own shelter with whatever you could find. And the results were not really luxurious, but it was a great learning experience, that there are a lot of resources given by nature for free, and all we need is the creativity or the sensitivity to see those resources, and then the creativity to use them. And I was a bit in a similar situation. I went with 19 years old, I went to a remote Bangladeshi village called Rudapur with the aim to learn or to see life from a different perspective. And what I learned from the NGO was exactly the same. You know, you have to look at the resources you have at your hands and try to make the best out of it, and not trying to depend on external factors, you know. And that's the most resilient or the most effective strategy for resilience and sustainable development. And this is what I tried to transfer into architecture a couple of years later. In terms of materials, I designed a school, and in terms of materials, I didn't have to look far, they were right under my feet. Earth, and the bamboo that was growing all around. And in terms of local energy sources, it was people. I mean, when we think of energy sources, we think of sun, we think of wind, we think of oil, but we as human beings, we are also sources of energy, and we are a growing source. More than, we are almost 8 billion people, so we need to use this source as well, otherwise we create a social problem. We need to create work through architecture. So it was really basic. We rotated or mixed with water buffaloes and cows, the mud, and we had no electricity, so very similar to the situation that you probably had in Morocco. And after 6 months of construction, the school looked like this, really load-bearing earth wall, no cement in the walls, only in the foundation, and then the bamboo roof, the second floor or first floor. We kept the tradition to sit on the ground, and through these bolt holes, you come into the cave areas. The briefing of the client was to build a school where children actually love to go inside and feel well and open up their senses. And I tried to remember the spaces that I loved when I was a kid. And I think that's a very archaic pattern, the caves, the protection, the warmth-like feeling, but still always having the connection to the classroom and to the crowd and the people, so that you're not kind of excluded. So you still have always the connection, which I think, you're kind of hidden away, but you have the overview of what's going on. And the opposite feeling, the kind of the tree house atmosphere in the top floor. The children all signed with the names on the doors, and they rightfully did so because they also helped building the school. And you cannot do this with every building material, but with earth, it's a wonderful inclusive material. It's not harmful, you don't need sophisticated tools, you can use only your hands, and it's wonderful to touch. It's non-toxic, so it's really, for me, one of the beautiful assets of earth, that it is so inclusive. We also had people with disabilities working on the site, of course, men and women, and also elderly people. So it was really a fantastic diversity in the team. And I guess you can all imagine how it feels when you're a small boy or a girl standing after 6 months in front of your school, and you built this thing with using only your hands, your own muscles, and the dirt beneath your feet. That just gives an enormous boost in confidence in your own talents and your own skills, in the team, and of course in the local materials that have a very bad image there, like especially the mud. I think that's a problem all over the world, that it is seen as a material of the poor, although it is such a beautiful and wonderful material. So you can build it in a very durable way. I mean, there are lots of hundreds of year-old earthen houses all around the globe. Show me a house built out of Portland cement that is 500 years old. It's not existing. I mean, you have the pozzolano, but not the current cement that is not that old. So, so these walls are hit by horizontal monsoon rains since 2005, and the walls are standing strong. We didn't have to repair the walls. The bamboo, yes, we did some mistakes with the bamboo, but the walls are really, the earth walls are standing strong. You have to apply some certain rules, good boots, meaning a good foundation, a good hut, a good roof, and then the walls are really standing strong. In terms of economic sustainability, it was for me really wonderful to see that, the workers got paid on a daily basis. Every evening they would get the money, and then together we would go to the local market. And I could see how the workers spent their money, their share of building budget, and it was invested in buying vegetables from the neighbor or the local farmers, getting a new sauerkraut blouse from the local tailor, getting the bicycle repaired. So the building budget was really reinvested in the community. And the effect of the building budget was not just the building, was not just the school, but it was also a catalyst for local development. And if I had built that school in concrete and steel, this money would have been lost for the community. And for me, when it comes to economic sustainability, it's never the question just low cost, which is the usual case. But for me, the question is who gets the profit and who gets the benefit. And I think that's much more important anywhere in the world. So this is the question, and I'm asking this the same, when I'm working in Germany or I'm working in in Austria, it's always the same question, you know, I want to be able in the end, you know, when I'm summing up all my building budgets in the end of my life, I want to be able to tell myself that it ended up with those who really needed it and not just making the rich industries even more rich. The last building I did in the same village in Rudurpur in the northern part of Bangladesh is a center for people with disabilities and a workshop for fair clothes production. I'm wearing one of those. So unlike the first building that is very much box-like and precise, and about some other buildings there that are also the same way, very kind of boxes and precise, which was, I think, important in the beginning to show you can do precise architecture with those traditional materials. You can go really also in refined edges and everything. But with this one, you know, I wanted to show it's good that we have a diversity, that we human beings not just follow all the same kind of pattern, the same norm, but we have people that break out of the mold. And that is something beautiful, and that is something to celebrate. So this building is actually celebrating this diversity and is breaking out of the mold, literally. So when you approach the building, the first thing you see is this ramp that winds up all around the building. And already during the construction site, you know, people came and said, you know, why do you need a ramp? Because it's the only ramp in that area, the only ramp they have ever seen. So it makes it clear, you know, you're immediately at the topic of inclusiveness. And that's also a powerful thing on architecture, that you can make things very much or very clearly visible and ideas and concepts. These are the therapy rooms on the ground floor. And underneath the ramp, we have caves that are different than the ones on Meti, so you can really crawl in from the ground, and you can crawl much longer, and it's a bit more difficult, and it's also part of the therapy, you know, that the children have to move their bodies in a different way than they usually do, so they train their muscles, they train their coordination skills, so it's a very, and of course it's a rewarding thing, you know, it's not just, you know, you have to practice on a kind of instrument, but it's kind of a nice area, and besides that, it's also, you know, that the children from the village, the ones that are having no disabilities, they also try to sneak in because they love that space, but they know they are kind of the guests of the children with disabilities. So it's a kind of small little universe where different rules apply, and it's kind of a different zone also for connecting with each other. So these is the ramp built out of bamboo and earth, and also the terraces. And this is the workspace of Dipty Textiles, where we're just preparing actually also a show in the Eco Museum in Madrid. So if you are here in February, you're most welcome to see the results of the work of the women there. That's one of the blankets. And for me, that is also part of you know, architecture. I'm not a fashion designer, I'm not a textile designer, I'm doing this as an architect because I saw, you know, that the settlement pattern in Bangladesh is the most dominating factor who actually, the garment sector is that element who influences the settlement patterns most dominantly in Bangladesh, because, you know, it drags all the labor force from the villages into some of the hubs, of the fabrication hubs, and that really has a huge impact on the villages, because, you know, the women have to leave their families, they have to go and live in this kind of textile hubs where their life is very much depending on external factors, where they lose a lot of independence and a lot of life quality. So I wanted to bring in some work opportunities for the women to be able to stay with their families, and, you know, also to keep the village alive. This is a documentation of the village. We were working that for example is the Meti school, and that is the building I just showed you. And these kind of blue dots here, these are all the excavation sources for the mud houses. And the dark green dots are all, I think I have it here more bigger, the dark green ones is all the bamboo that is growing around. And then of course you have the paddy fields that provide the straw for the roofs, and of course also the food, and then you have little house gardens and so on. So the circularity of materials for construction, but also for daily life is really very closed, and that makes it so sustainable. I've been there just 2 weeks back, and unfortunately the village has dramatically changed within these 2 years that I wasn't there, because of the pandemic. I couldn't travel. And now the government is handing out tin houses for free. And they're tearing down all the mud houses and replacing them with these tin shelters. And I asked them how they feel in winter, how they feel in summer. And they said, well, of course, it's not as comfortable. But, you know, if you get something for free and it's shiny, yeah, that was a painful process or a moment to experience that these are changing. And then, of course, you see also a lot of brick houses. And then when you pass by these brick fields, you see the piles of coal lying around, and then suddenly also a lot of electricity is there. Before it was not so much in that quantity, but people had solar energy. Now they have electricity also powered by coal. They close the windows during the daytime and have the lights on. So there's a lot of changes happening that is making clear that we still have a lot of work in front of us, but we're not giving up. So, yeah, no matter if I'm working with architecture or textiles, the underlying approach is always local materials plus local energy, especially people, labor, human craftsmanship, plus global knowledge. I think that knowledge should not be limited to a specific place. I think it should be accessible anytime, everywhere. But it's always important to apply this global knowledge and know-how to the existing resources. And I think that triggers also the creativity. So I'm doing this when I'm working in Europe. That was the first commission that I had. That was the headquarters of Omicron Electronics that had sponsored some of the projects that I did. And they wanted to have some of that atmosphere in the headquarters in Austria. I did it together with Martin Rauch. And we wanted to test the most basic building method, taking the wet soil, the local wet soil, and just shaping it by hand without any formwork and so on. But we wanted to do it in a two-story way. So this was the design that we did and the way we built, super low tech. But inside you see the cables, you have all the electricity, you also have the heating, you have cooling and so on, and of course also the airflows and sound system included, but still the building technique is absolutely low tech. And this is the space underneath. And kind of the niches for the power naps. And this is another structure we did. It's a wooden structure that is hanging from the ceiling that is covered with fair trade silk. And you also see the shiny surface that was also done similar like the Tadalakt in Morocco, just by polishing the mud with semi-precious stones. And that's the other structure, the Zeppelin. I'm also working a lot with bamboo, and I was invited in China for a bamboo biennale along with other architects like Kenko Kuma, for example, and Simon Welles. So the idea was to show and to prove that you can build with old materials, but it doesn't mean that you have to use always old architectural language, but you can also do it in a modern way. And I think it's very important. I'm often asked, do you want to send people back to Stone Age? Of course not, but it's not a matter how old a material is. It's a matter of our creative ability to use it today. So this was kind of, these were youth hostels, three hostels that we built, and with really an intensive bamboo weaving structure. The idea was to have a core that hosts all the facilities, and attached to this core and staircase there are like these concones, like tents or Chinese lampshades, where then the boys and girls could go to for sleeping. Oh, this should be a video, but I think is it working? Yeah, it's working. So so they really did a fantastic job in the bamboo weaving. And here you see the interior structure. And of course, this is the reality all around. Between 2011 and 2013, China has consumed more cement than the United States in the past century. And it's not just China, this is happening in India, and I mean so many countries around the world, and we clearly cannot continue like this. We have to look for alternatives such as timber, such as earth, and so on. And of course, you need to find also different tools. You can work in high-tech, you can work in low-tech. The quality is always the same. As I said, this is a kind of factory, earth factory in Austria that transfers the local excavation material into building blocks. You see the machine here. It's ramming the whole wall. It's cut into pieces and then applied on the site and joined again with mud and water. So this is a structure that I built again with Martin Rauch. It's a health facility in Germany, where we also aim to reach a happy frugality, you know, less space, less square meters, but high quality and healthy materials, high quality of craftsmanship. It's a timber, load-bearing timber structure with a willow facade, willow weaving facade, and inside we have all this earth. The last project I want to show is also in Germany. It was a competition for building a new altar, which was really delicate because first it was the 1,000-year-old birthday of the cathedral, and the interior is made by Balthasar Neumann, so it was very difficult to put something in front of it. And you know that one priest delegated the task to the next generation priest because everyone was afraid to do the wrong action, you know, in front of, what do you put in front of Balthasar Neumann? So really difficult. But we decided, you know, not to bring the ready-made object, but to bring the tools, the materials, and that the community gets together to build up this altar, you know, to celebrate the community. And that was a wonderful experience. We also, you know, initially the concept was to bring in historic elements from the Roman times and so on, from the rich historic times of Worms, of the city of Worms. But day after day, you know, people started to bring also their personal items, you know. Amulets went in, the best wine, the honey of the region, newspaper articles, letters, postcards. So a lot of personal items went in, and it became more and more really an object of the community, or kind of a reflection of the community. The children all came. They put in some pink glitter that you will see now in a second, which didn't, you know, much to the dismay of the priest. He was in panic that the altar would glitter in pink in the end, which was not the case. And you know, we had everyone from the choir, from the council, from the altar boys and girls, and that was, you know, the moment, you know, where we were standing in front of the finished object, and we just want, you know, we couldn't let go. We constantly wanted to touch it. And what you see here on this picture so much on the faces of the people, you know, you're not just building a building, you also build up a community. And that's the wonderful thing. In the past, we came together as society, built a city hall, built a church, built a mosque, whatever. And this kind of pulling on one direction to reach one common aim, I think that is something that really fostered our community. And now we delegated the act of building always to experts, and we don't have this community building processes anymore. But I think that's a huge loss, and we have to enable participation again. And this picture is for me very symbolic for our society, you know, with all the gold in the background. We are not lacking of materiality, we are lacking of good relationships. But this is something the process of construction and architecture can also provide. Question is, form follows what? Form follows function, I think, is outdated. I mean, architecture is much more complex, and society is much more complex, and we have to react to this. So to me, you know, we have a lot of functional buildings, we have a lot of good-looking buildings, but we need meaningful buildings and really beautiful buildings. And the question is, what is real beauty? And to me, it's a formal expression of love. So to me, it would be form follows love. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Anna. Hacemos como we will do as we did before. We have questions now, so you're very welcome to.
I did it like so, but I probably need this one.
Thank you, Anna. We have some questions coming from the chat, and there is Marlene who is asking, how can the perspective of Earth as a poor material be changed within rural and local communities?
Sorry? Okay.
How can the perspective of Earth as a poor material be changed within rural and local communities?
Well, through a good designed process and through a good designed architecture. I think, beauty is really a big engine and a big motivator. And that is something that is really powerful. I mean, it's very emotional beauty. Everyone is striving for it. So I think we really have to rely on and trust in that.
Okay.
And then also, when the process is good and people earn through it, and they are part of it, they, put their energy in this kind of structures, they feel part of it. So there's a lot of bonding happening. So that both the design of the process and the design of the outcome has to be really good.
Okay, and then we also have Ana Isabel Garrido Martinez, who is asking, do you think that keeping all aspects of the construction process and final results local is the best way to be sustainable and inclusive within the communities?
Yes, I think it adds just to resilience if you do the best out of existing resources and not relying on external factors. I mean, we had it now also in the construction sector in Europe, or where suddenly we are lacking of materials and so on. You don't have this with earth, this is existing.
Thank you for such a pleasure to see you in person. I knew your project, so I'm very happy. Paolo Vitti from Rome, University of Notre Dame. I wanted to ask you, what do you think about New European Bauhaus and the use of traditional knowledge and techniques and materials? Because there is a lot of new technologies, innovation comes always through a dispense of technology, and what we understand more and more, that is quite the opposite.
Yes, thank you for this question. I think this is somehow a very human notion, to always crave for the new, the sparkling one, the new materials, conquering new grounds, new technologies. To me, it also seems to be a little bit of a male approach. I'm sorry to say this, but I think, our profession has been very male-dominated for, centuries almost. And I think we have to integrate also the female aspects, caring for resources, valuing what is there, nourishing those things. And I think it's very much, it's not a matter of being a man or a woman. I think, everyone has these qualities in it. And it's just, our education system and the past has been just very much the focus on this kind of conquering element and not so much of this caring element. And I think for new constructions in Europe, we definitely need those locally existing buildings, materials that have been building up our cultural and historic richness that we have. I mean, we have all these earth houses all around Europe as well, for example, but we have a kind of a cultural blackout when it comes to that, because often the earth was also hidden behind, mortar facades and so on, because it always had this kind of image of being poor. But I think, with a good modern architecture, we can also really show that it has its own beautiful character, and we can really unfold this beauty, and not just with earth, also with timber, of course, also with fibers that are extremely important. And without these materials, we cannot build the sustainable future. They are absolutely essential. And yes, finding right tools to enhance the processes, to make it more easier to apply. For example, with water buffaloes, I cannot rotate in Basel or in Germany. I have to have some more faster processes. So prefabrication, as I showed before, is an important element. But the material is just the same as it was used in the past. So finding the right tools for the right context is a task that we have to trigger or to tackle. Yes.
Thank you. It was an excellent talk. But I just wondered, the issue of community and building and scale. Of course, you showed a picture of a huge city in China, which are absolutely huge cities. So I very much like the idea that a community engages in the building project. At a village scale, this is fairly straightforward because the community is easily identified. At an urban scale, you have communities within communities within communities. Some of which control others and some of which don't control others. I mean, our urban condition in many respects is our most challenging and important condition. I wonder if you have any comments on the issue of urban scale and community construction.
Yes, so I'm really trying to have a space for participation in all my projects, also in an urban context. You know, in the end, it all comes down to people, to humans. And, you know, and we all have the same kind of needs, no matter if we live in a rural area or in an urban area. And I think it's a very humane notion that we want to build. I mean, every child is playing to build. You know, you build a hut with branches, or you build a hut, you know, with blankets in your home. But this act of building is something that is part of our human DNA. And now we just delegate this kind of act of building to experts, and we get the key and it's all done. And then we are running to IKEA and all these interior shops and hardware store, you know, to fulfill this need for building your own nest in a way. And that just adds to consumption and you know, and a lot of trash in the end. So I think, you know, it's not realistic to have the whole city built by, you know, just in a participatory approach, but to keep parts of it, you know, where people can participate. Or, you know, in a classroom, you could have one earth wall with mud blasters where children could do, you know, their reliefs and so on. It's super easy to do. You would have a much better indoor quality because of that earth wall, you know, with the humidity balancing effect. And children would be in contact with natural materials, so it would be really something that is easy to apply. You know, I think that's possible, and we have, as architects, we have to enable that, and also step back a little bit of this notion of perfection and control, because control and perfection are the killer for participation. So, you know, I'm really trying in all the projects to keep some parts and spots really free for that really human need for participation and self-actualization, and, you know, leaving your energy, your imprint somewhere. And also maybe just about earth and urban spaces, I think, you know, the more dense it is, the more, you know, we are also longing for some natural materials. We've built structures in front of the Graduate School of Design, for example, at Harvard in Boston, and the earth looked like concrete because it was gray. But we constantly had people touching the walls just intuitively. They were on the phone and suddenly, you know, touching the wall. And it was very obvious that we don't just perceive materials on a visual way, but also with some other senses. And, you know, to have these natural elements in a dense urban context, suddenly an earth shoot is coming out, you know, and having a facade you actually want to touch. I mean, how often do we run around and petting facades? I mean, that's not what we usually do, but I think it's something wonderful if you want to touch a building, you know. It just means that we have a relationship to it. So I think it would do our cities really good, and it would bring in a lot of humanity and good feeling also, you know, to have these elements in the city. Because humankind grew up with this kind of materials in a close relationship. I think we're longing for this relationship again.
Thank you very much, Anna.
Thank you.
Thank you, and congratulations.
Thank you.
Tenemos ahora un descanso hasta...
Well, we have a short break now, 20 minutes or 25 minutes, and we will resume the session with the presentation from Salvador Gomez. Thank you.
Ahora sí. Guillermo. Bien.
So, I apologize for the delay. The next presentation will be given by Salvador Gomez, one of the most important masters in the building of brick vaults, especially Timbrel vaults in Spain. Thank you very much for your invitation. So, I'd like to start describing how I started out in this profession. And then I'll tell you something about what I do now. I started out with this. Timbrel Vault staircases. I was very young when I started out. My hometown has a large number of experts in the building of these structures. So I started out with a master builder in my hometown. We started with simple hollow brick, and we built many staircases during the boom years. And we worked much more than formwork workers because our service was very quick. I mean, we did everything very fast. The technique is very fast, and in a matter of 3 days, you had your staircase. So this is how I started out. And then I decided to use other materials, solid brick. I tried to learn a bit more, and we made some headway. We made some progress. In this case, I used artisanal bricks. They're quite beautiful, these staircases. And then I met 2 professors from the Valencia Polytechnic University, Fernando Velas and Ania Bileto. And through them, I was introduced to Rafael Montana. And this is when I started to focus on roofings and vaults, because during the first 10, 12 years, I just did staircases. So after this experience, I started building different things, such as this thing. This one here, a Pantheon, for José Soriano, the founder of Porcelanosa, designed by Fernando Legasi and Camino Bileto. This was a challenge, this Pantheon. It wasn't easy. And eventually, it was more or less successful. So after this, I got more commissions. I started building different vaults. Not just staircases. This was in 2015. I need to mention this guy, Wessam Asali. This project I executed with the Cambridge University with Wessam Asali and Michael Ramash, who's a professor of architecture in Cambridge. Wessam came in 2015 to Valencia. I was designing some vaults for the Venice Biennial, in 2016 with Philip Bloch and the Polytechnic University of Valencia. He came to Valencia, he came to see me, and then he visited other vault makers in Spain. When he returned to Cambridge, he called me up to invite me to Cambridge for a specific project, and of course I didn't hesitate. I packed my bags and flew to the UK. And this is our shared project. It was awarded an important prize in Spain. And I'm very thankful because Wessam Asali invited me to the award ceremony. I mean, it's usually architects who are presented with these awards, not just masons or artisans. I mean, many of my works have been awarded important prizes, but the prizes are presented to the architects who designed the vaults, not to the artisans. This is an experiment by Wessam. We tried to make the vault in one specific place, and we cut it up, moved it, and reconstructed on site. It was a research project. It was a wonderful experiment. But my main conclusion is that we need to research more. I'd rather build the vaults on site, because building them in one place and then moving them somewhere else is quite challenging and complicated. So this is the same piece from the inside. You can appreciate the work it entails. I tend to be self-taught. After building so many staircases, I learned to make sturdy staircases. 50 staircases there, 80 there during the boom years. So we had a team. My workers, I made the vault, and then my assistants did everything else. Some young architects don't know anything about this technique, and they're quite hesitant and afraid. After making the vault, which is self-supporting, they support structures, or they've been supporting structures for more than 500 years. But young architects forced me to use concrete and iron in the dome because they weren't taught traditional techniques in the university. So based on my experience, I managed to do things such as this one here, a wine cellar for a friend of mine. And this is a fireplace for a good friend of mine too, using the same technique, the Timbrel Vault technique. This is the International Symposium of Timbrel Vaults organized in Valencia at the Polytechnic University. Some students designed this parametric vault. We all know that students have very little money, so we ran out of funds. We couldn't add anything else to the structure. But based on my experience, I told them, don't worry, I'll make it. And I did it in line with their expectations. I finished the vault as it had been designed by the students, thanks to the experience I had accumulated for so many years. And this vault was replicated in a TV program in the set. They replicated this vault, and I was very happy. Fernando Vegas, I'll try to, gave a presentation in Barcelona some 15 years ago. This is the beginnings of my interest in vaults. And when I stepped into the theater and I saw the vault, I was surprised it had been recently exposed. I mean, before it had been covered with gypsum. And I told Fernando, I believe I'd be able to make this. So they gave me some books about vaults by Bostadino and other Spanish writers. And I started to research. And after that, I considered myself able to make these things, these vaults. There are many people in my hometown who build staircases, but they're quite reluctant to tackle vaults and roofings, even though it's more or less the same. This is the Venice Biennial, where I built a traditional vault and a second vault with pressed earth blocks, or CEB, compressed earth blocks. This is a commission by Philip Bloch. So we built the wall with CEB blocks, an interesting option for developing countries, so that they can build their own bricks, to build their own roofings. We had some projects in the pipeline that have been postponed because of the pandemic. We had organized some humanitarian actions. I was supposed to visit different countries to teach the local population to build these vaults, which are quite simple to build, so that people can cover their houses using this technique. And we can build a second floor on top of the structure. So on top of this, we would build, place the flooring slabs, and we could build different floors using this technique with no cement, no iron, no concrete whatsoever. And this is something people have been doing for many centuries, but these techniques are disappearing. Fewer and fewer people master them. So after meeting Wessam, after working with him, this is a vault I designed for Paolo Vitti in Girona. It's quite challenging. It's quite a challenging structure. It looks almost flat. It has no iron whatsoever. It does have some stays, because it's so flat that the lateral thrust is very high. It has 5 layers of bricks, 5 brick layers. It's almost flat, only 16 centimeters.
Bastante difícil de hacer, pero se puede conseguir, se pueden hacer.
The span is almost 15 centimeters. It's a sail vault, a sail dome, and you can build these things without iron or concrete. This is also in Valencia at the Polytechnic University. In one of their labs, we are researching the settlement of vaults to see how the vault reacts once a pillar is settled. This vault stretched from 12 to 14 centimeters. It cracked, but it never broke or collapsed. These are growing vaults, a replica of a vault in a Valencia church. I built 2 of these. After the test, the settling of the pillars, the vault was repaired with by Mapei, sorry. A second test was conducted with very positive results. This is a sound system to repair the vaults. I mean, the vault may be cracked, but the structure adapts to the new situation. It does not collapse. So perhaps it's advisable to repair them with minimal intervention, because it doesn't need an extensive repair. And this is what I wanted to share with you about my past. Based on my experience and Wesson's experience, because he's been researching Timbrel Vaults for 5 years, and we've come to the realization that the demand is increasing for these vaults and also for traditional trades that are endangered. In Valencia, I know 1 or 2 masters mud walls and adobe bricks, and I mean, we want to recover these trades. I've organized a number of workshops in Castile, in Granada, in Valencia, in Cambridge as well. I've organized some workshops in Rome with Paolo Vitti. New architects have a lot of interest. They are really interested in these techniques, I know that. But of course, we also need labor. If the architect introduces this new technique in their project, they need labor, qualified labor, who know about these techniques. So it's very important for new architects to know about these techniques so that they can use them in their projects. Because otherwise, I mean, architects usually complain about the lack of labor, and I said it's your fault because you no longer use these techniques, so the labor, qualified labor, has disappeared. There are only 4 or 5 people who know how to do this, I tell them. In the past, any mason knew how to build Timbrel Vault staircases, but of course these people have retired, they're no longer with us, some of them, so the technique has almost disappeared. Why? Because there's no demand. I understand that universities no longer teach these techniques since the 70s, with the emergence of reinforced concrete. So the demand collapsed and qualified labor disappeared. Rome, for instance, is full of vaults, but there's no one who knows how to repair them, not to mention Cuba. I mean, these techniques have disappeared all over the place. In Spain, the technique has survived thanks to those of us who built staircases. In Valencia, if you build a Timbrel Vault staircase, if you want to reconstruct it, you need to use the same technique. That's very important to preserve the heritage. If it's collapsed and you have to demolish it, you would need to rebuild it. You need to build a structure identical to the previous one. That's very important, in my opinion. In my hometown, I have more than 20 years' experience. I haven't stopped building staircases of this sort, even though many architects believe that no one builds these staircases anymore. So this has survived thanks to people such as myself, who kept on building things like this. And we have preserved the technique somehow. We need communication between architects and engineers and artisans or masons to know, to perfectly understand how these structures are built. And this is what we're trying to do. We have organized different workshops, and Serra has shown a lot of interest. I mean, has identified a lot of interest. This is an award we received. Then this is Bétera, a village close to Valencia where we want to build the headquarters of the school. It's a very accessible place close to the Mediterranean Sea. This is a research project that I am conducting with Wessam. You know that in the Arab countries, concrete blocks are widely used for the reconstruction of Syria. This is a project we've crushed the debris to build bricks. And we've built vaults with very positive results in the tests. So you can recycle debris to build new things with these materials, something I find very interesting actually. After the pandemic, of course, I mean, the activities have re-emerged. The first third-cal workshop we've organized after the pandemic was in Scotland in the Prince Charles Foundation, the Princess Foundation. It was a very successful initiative targeted to artisans, and it has been a very successful workshop. And we've been able to identify and to notice that there's a huge interest for these techniques. Many of the participants were surprised. They didn't even know that we could build these structures with bricks. So most of our participants were quite surprised. They didn't really know that we could build vaults with bricks. Of course, you cannot curve bricks, but you can use them to create quite spectacular shapes, as you can see. So each group designed a bench. The task was to design urban elements or furniture, and it was very successful. In future collaborations with the foundation, we'll try to do something similar. And I will leave it here. I hope you enjoyed this presentation. And this is in Jordan, in a school that we built for Syrian refugees. So that was all. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure to share my story with you.
Ah, las preguntas. Verdad, no me acordaba.
Muchísimas gracias, Salvador. Bueno, como veis, además aquí hay muchas conexiones con otras cosas que hemos visto y con otros intervinientes y con, bueno, pues otras personas de las que se ha hablado, ¿no? Como lo de la Fundación del Príncipe, que también había salido ya, ¿no? Todo esto pues se va interconectando poco a poco. Bien, pues hacemos igual que en las conferencias anteriores. Comentarios, preguntas que queráis hacer.
Muchas gracias, Salvador.
No se oye.
Dos preguntas. ¿Cuántos maestros bodegueros hay hoy a Vétera? ¿Cuántos maestros?
No sé, ahora mismo que estemos trabajando puede que unos 10. Hay más, pero con el tema de la crisis, pues otros desaparecieron, ¿no? Pero yo, por ejemplo, llegué a tener 23 trabajadores, los cuales más de la mitad aprendieron a hacer bóvedas. Estos chavales que eran jóvenes.
More than 50% of them learned to make vaults. So there are 10 vault makers in Vétera. In the past, I had as many as 23 assistants or workers. But now in Vétera, we have 10 practicing vault makers. And what about the province of Valencia? Are there other places where you find vault makers? I mean, the highest concentration is in Vétera, but there are more master builders, vault makers in the Valencia area. But the highest concentration is found in Vétera, my hometown. Because this knowledge, these techniques have been passed on from generation to generation.
Mejor me dicen algo por decir este comentario, pero antiguamente...
In the past, those who knew these techniques worked very secretly. They just worked alone. They didn't want anyone witnessing their techniques and how they did things. My second question has to do with the mortar, lime mortar. Ideally, is more sustainable, right? However, the second layer uses cement. Well, it depends. In my opinion, it's much better to use lime mortar, but then it's up to the architects and to the materials they choose. It's not up to me in most cases. Hello, good morning, and thank you very much for your explanations. Could you tell us a bit more about the school you're organizing? The school you want to set up in Bétera? Of course, after the pandemic, everything is perhaps a bit more difficult. We have lots of people who are willing to pitch in, to lend a hand, and we are organizing workshops involved building and also on other traditional building techniques. So right now we're trying to get more people interested so that everyone can strive to recover these techniques for the sake of the planet, right? I mean, it's a must to be able to use local materials. Hello and congratulations for your work. I'd like to share something with you. After the Lorca earthquake in Spain, we were required to repair some Timbrel vaults that cracked. And we didn't really know how to go about it. We didn't find any books or manuals. Of course, common sense and experience go a long way. But I wanted to learn from someone who's built hundreds of square meters of vaults. I'd like to ask you about these repairs, because of course earthquakes crack the vaults. They don't collapse, as you mentioned before, but of course they need to be repaired. We didn't really know how to go about it. So we decided to tackle both the intrados and the area outside the intrados, replacing failing bricks and then covering everything with lime, plastering everything with lime. So how do you repair these vaults after an earthquake, or if there are other problems? Of course, we have to take full advantage of innovation. Traditional building techniques are there to be improved upon. We can innovate. So today we have new materials, meshes and fibers that you can use, that you can place inside the vault to repair them after an earthquake, for instance. So the first layer, you build the first layer using traditional techniques, but then in subsequent layers you can place meshes or fibers to reinforce them, and there are other modern techniques we can use. The vault I mentioned to you before, that very beautiful vault that we transported, eventually I had to destroy it. It broke my heart after so much work. This vault was reinforced with a mesh inside. And it was so hard to break it. You wouldn't believe it. Then they have conducted some research in Cambridge using different types of meshes. So it's a question of getting it right in your estimations or calculations, and perhaps in seismic areas these systems could be considered so that the vault doesn't collapse after an earthquake. Even if it breaks, thanks to the mesh, it would remain in place, it would not collapse. As I realized when I had to break the vault, it was so difficult to break it. So one should try to innovate a bit, even if you're using traditional techniques. Hello, we've received 2 questions from our online viewers. Jose Maria Sastre Martin would like you to give us more details about that project in Syria with recycled materials. Could you tell us a bit more about those materials? Sustainability was also a goal. So we had an X% of cement as well, but not a lot for the brick to be strong and stable. So it's recycled brick, but at the same time it's sustainable. We didn't use a lot of cement, but it does need a small percentage, from 5 to 8%, to stabilize the structure and to make it hard. Ramon Alemani has a very specific question for you. Is there a huge price difference between a traditional formwork and a formwork for a brick vault? Yes, there are differences. We did some estimations when we built the Pantheon and other structures. Had we built them with concrete, they would have been much more expensive. The square meter, the unit costs and the labor. I mean, you need more labor to build those structures with concrete. And then, of course, the times needed for the concrete to harden. It is much easier to do it with a timbrel structure, and it's more beautiful, more lasting. Salvador, congratulations for your work. I have something to I have a question for you. There's a biography by Javier Moro about Moravina, someone you mentioned before. Guastavino, sorry. It's tremendously interesting. I mean, his life is fascinating. So it's a wonderful biography. He built a 17-meter diameter vault before he traveled to New York when he was 17. The title of the novel is Fireproof, A Prueba de Fuego. And there's a double meaning there in that title. He traveled to New York, to America, when he was about 40, and it was his young child who taught him English, who learned English, because he didn't speak a word of English when he traveled to the US. But he became quite famous. He was a good friend of White's. So it was his guarantee that his vaults would never catch fire, and the New York building material didn't believe him, and he organized a demonstration. He overloaded one of these vaults, 200 kilograms per square foot, 2,000 kilograms of overload, and the vault was burning for 4 hours at 1,000 degrees, and it didn't collapse. It was burnt out, but it didn't collapse, the vault. And this has a lot to do with the company he created, Guastavino Fireproof Constructions. He patented the thin hollow brick and the mortar. And I'm mentioning this because I find it very interesting, considering modern fire regulations, something that this guy had solved in the first quarter of the last century. So I guess you know a lot about fireproof vaults. The research project I mentioned before, the settlement of the pillars, of the vault. This research project is much more extensive. We will have explosion tests and fire tests and other tests to be conducted. Everything has come to a halt after the pandemic, but we will be conducting those tests to standardize these techniques. Because of course we need to change people's mindset, architects and engineers, in my opinion, should have an open mind and change their mindsets to be open to embrace these techniques. I mean, to build well, to build successfully, we have to look to the past, believe it or not. To build well, it's necessary to look back and to research. But if these traits disappear, sooner or later, we won't know how these things were built, because of course I'm getting on in years. I'll get older and more tired. I will retire, and perhaps I won't have the energy to teach other people. Some people, when they retire, decide to do nothing or to devote their time to something else. So these traits are being lost, they're disappearing because no one teaches them. So we have to encourage young people so that, I mean, these are traits that could be wonderful, that could be a good living for young people. But in the US, of course, we have the example of this guy who patented all of those materials, as you will read in the novel, which is quite comprehensive. It does provide with, it does describe details about the patent. I mean, it could be interesting, this experience, because it's more or less forgotten. It's quite incredible, right? This guy, the Spanish guy that no one knew anything about in Spain. I heard of him at the University of Valencia, but when I mentioned his name, Guastavino, no one knows who he is. Calatrava, however, is known by everyone. Guastavino is very well known in the US. He's considered a true master, but in Spain, no one knows who he is. I'm sorry, but he's not using the microphone. There's a documentary about Guastavino, and I have a starring role. I'm the only one who lays brick in the documentary, and thanks to this, I got to know his family. And one of his descendants has been researching for a number of years about his work. And I agree with you, a lot of useful information can be drawn from those experiments and from those patents. I have a question, but I think we've run out of time. Because, of course, there are other presentations. Thank you very much.
Bien, tenemos ahora una mesa redonda.
Well, next is a panel discussion. I'm sorry, but Alejandro is not using the microphone.
Algo del pasado en realidad es algo que es perfectamente viable y válido hoy en día y que se está practicando por mucha más gente de la que parece. Y en ese sentido,
pues a quienes no lo conozcáis os
Well, which is going to discuss the traditional building crafts in contemporary practice. If you haven't, please visit the website on building construction, building masters, which brings together more than 400 construction masters, and the number continues to grow. So I think we're still in time to keep these crafts alive. I think, that otherwise these crafts will be just lost forever, as Salvador has mentioned.
Bien, modera la mesa.
Leopoldo Gil will chair this session. He's an architect and a winner of the first Rafael Montana Prize of Traditional Architecture in 2012. And he's a perfect example of an architect who's strived to keep these crafts alive. And he is accompanied by Paco Luis, who is an expert carpenter and cabinet maker and polychromic Luis Prieto, masters in stuccos and paintings, and Paco Luis Jesus Adeba, who's also a master in many different trades. Well, I am the chairman of this panel discussion, and I would like to ask a question to all three of you. I think that the artisans are endangered. And this is a fact, right? Because their numbers are diminishing. But why is this happening? Because at the end of the day, everyone wants to make a profit. The developer, the constructors. If these can, there are some things that can be done faster, more efficiently and cheaper. Why not use these techniques? Why not use these trades? And there are many examples. Luis Moya, former professor, used and wrote about Timbrel Vaults. So the question is, and this is addressed to Paco Luis, isn't there an element of nostalgia about the use of traditional materials and not, which is not really based on reality? Well, we are sitting under a gypsum ceiling. What is and this is a reality. The materials are basically the same, they're just mixed differently. But I think that we have lost is the aesthetics. We walked around Madrid the other day and we could not see a single lime facade. We just found 5 of them. Why? Because it's very different and difficult to distinguish a lime facade. I just read in the news today that the president of France had changed the blue color in the French flag and no one had noticed. Why? Because we just don't notice these kind of things anymore. However, due to climatic change, maybe people, there's an increasing number of people who are starting to think about these materials. Well, I think that what we have really lost is a little bit more than that. We've lost the contact, the connection between the people and their homes. Because after all, housing is a home. Because we're used to buy things as they are. I mean, we just buy them and that's it. We don't interact with their process of production or design or anything. And this, I think, highlights a very basic problem. The disconnect between architecture and, well, I'm not going to talk about the building code, we all know what it is, but I think we've lost the connection between architecture and people. When you have a building master, which is an endangered species, because a building master is someone who must know how things are done, but not based on a book or a theory, but they must know how things are done because they've done them before with their own hands. This is just like learning music. You can learn a lot, but practice makes perfect. So an architect has his own job. A technical architect, what we call the aparejador, is just takes care of the safety aspects of construction. But of course, there is no one who has a whole picture, which is not the drawing. You have to be familiar with the materials, and we've just forgotten about the materials. What the hell are we doing? We've just become designers. We don't know how to lay gypsum anymore. I don't like the word craftsmanship. I prefer the word trade. But it's not an art, it's a trade. Well, I've interrupted you, and I apologize, because I would like to highlight something that Salvador said before. With Timbrel Vaults, with these, they were sculptures after all. That's my opinion. They did not qualify as architecture, if you like, despite the beauty. It was just like this Timbrel Vault structure in the wine cellar, but in this was not very did not sit very well with the concrete structure. That's my opinion. One of the things I've always believed, and I was taught that as a child, is that materials are not good or bad. There is no such thing as an awful material. No. Someone mentioned it before, using the right tools, using the right materials. Materials are not right or wrong. They can be used right or wrong. They can be fit for purpose or not. And sometimes we criticize materials excessively, as you've mentioned when you refer to the building code. But and I'm playing the devil's advocate here, but does that solve our problems? Well, Luis, for instance, you restore coffered ceilings, right? Yes, I did say altarpieces, but I meant coffered ceilings. Do you have any new construction projects? Well, a few. A few years ago, maybe 15 years ago, when we established the company, we did a lot of restoration because there was a lot of heritage that needed restoration. There was an interest on restoration. But in recent years, maybe it was the result of the crisis, restoration has lost steam. So we just focused on new constructions, building roofs and structures for new buildings, new constructions. And in the US, in Los Angeles, for instance, I do have an office in LA in which more than 50% of the work I do takes place in Los Angeles. So a very traditional product, such as the Mudéjar type of coffered ceiling, which is highly valued in Spain, but especially in the US. And do you think that's right? Is that an example of preserving tradition? Well, I think it's only natural. We have to adapt materials to the times we live in. We have been selected some of our sculptures for the Arco exhibition because sometimes I don't even understand what the specs are. I don't know if they want me to use plasterboard or whatever, but I think that sometimes clients do not even know how to describe what they want, the ratios of lime with water, whatever. I mean, they don't even know what they're talking about. But I think that materials are the same. The only thing that changes is the mindset of the people. Just needs to adapt to the times. Well, I'll carry on then. Well, trades are not dying. It's always there. We just need to learn how to interpret it. If you know how to lay brick, well, they just need to continue to apply their knowledge. If you know how to use the right tools, you learn how to lay stucco or whatever, but the job is the same. The market is the one that leads us to believe that it's better to do it differently because it's business after all. But people who work with traditional materials are very much aware of the power of these materials because, well, we talk about tradition and traditional materials, but tradition can evolve, which can be as innovative as new materials. There is room for learning in traditional construction techniques. And of course, this generates benefits for the dwellers of a house. And the house is a home where your family lives. And if we were told your children are going to live in a toxic house, and of course this makes no sense at all. And sometimes the most basic techniques using a level, for instance, or another technique makes takes very little effort, but really makes a difference. Sometimes we just stick to the tradition while there is a great room for improvement, and this is not against innovation at all. Regarding innovation, how do you innovate in your work? Do you use a saw for cutting? Well, it's a traditional technique, of course, but we use all of the tools, transport, trucks, timber, etc. But there is something I would like to highlight. The price is a very important factor in construction, and these makes some traditional building arts no longer profitable. Maybe it can be profitable in some very specific cases, but in the houses where most of us live, well, there is no room for traditional construction because budgets are very tight, and it makes sense in that these traditional building arts are increasingly neglected. Well, in my work, coatings, we use the trowel, which is a traditional instrument. A few years ago, the new Japanese trowel appeared in the market, and it replaced all of the traditional trowels because it represents a major development in such a simple tool. I mean, how is that possible? It's just a handle and a piece of metal, and it's amazing, but it's a reality. Innovation is permanent, it never stops, but it's a reality. Well, regarding my work, I continue to work to using traditional materials. When you work in the area, in the field of heritage, of course, you have to be as consistent as possible with whatever your project is. So you end up working the way you've always worked, but of course you have to adapt to the circumstances and to the sites, and of course you have to take advantage of the existing innovations. Why not? And this applies to materials as well, in how to prepare lime or the plaster. All of that, I think, can be used, put to good use. However, price is a factor, but if you tell people, well, your house is going to be fine for 10 years, but then, and that's it. 10 years is as far as we can go. And then people may have second thoughts about the question of price. So we really need to keep up the struggle and continue to be vigilant about all of these aspects. Well, regarding the comment about the works of art, I agree. I've done a lot of I've built a lot of these vaults, and I've done a lot of formwork. I've built a school with 500 square meters, a slab. So, and I think that's what the vaults should be used for. And that's all I had to say, really. Well, I think instead of showing models, we have to show results. Buildings, rooftops, built with slabs. I live in a house with vaults which are older than more than 100 years old, and there is no thermal waterproofing or anything like that, because this was not available at the end of the 19th century. So I think the Catalan type of rooftop sits very well with these type of vaults, using the materials that you've referred to. Maybe you can use limes in the joints or something, because after all, the Timbrel vaults required a very fast setting of the mortar that you use for the joints. And I would like you to show some practical results of your works, and not just the fine details of this type of structure. But that's my personal opinion, because at the end of the day, this is not an award for beauty of a sculpture. We're talking about architecture. Yes, you're absolutely right, Leopoldo. I have a comment, it's not a question, following up on what Jesus has said. Well, after 20 climate summits, we've finally come to terms with the idea that we have a climate crisis. And I think something similar has happened with sustainable construction, which is really a good example of how innovation can be found in tradition. As to the use of machinery in contemporary craftsmanship, we talk about what really gives value to the product compared to an industrial product. So I think the traditional arts must adapt to the materials, because at the end, after all, these materials improve the constructive processes and make them more cost effective. Well, anything that improves the working circumstances of a human being is absolutely essential. That's a fact. And I think we all have a right to improve our way of living. And life is in constant evolution, after all.
I can speak Greek if you want.
The materials, there is a question that is very clear, that modernism has brought new materials. And the building industry in the last 20 years has changed materials in a quite regular manner. That is to say that the knowledge of the products and the materials is not the same as once. That in a local context, you knew the materials, so everyone could access to technologies knowing the specifications and how you could work the materials to achieve a good result. Now, what we have learned, particularly in the field of conservation, is at a certain point, from the Conference of Athens 1931, it was said, oh, new materials and cement can be used in conservation. And then suddenly we realized in the 1980s that this was a disaster because our monuments were totally having impressive structural problems. And we returned back to the use of traditional materials and traditional building techniques. Thanks to that, in countries like Italy and Greece, there has been, from the field of conservation, a new wave of understanding materials, traditional materials and traditional building techniques. And this is a matter of compatibility between the monuments and the additions and the transformations. Now, the point remains that we are in the hands of a building industry, and the building industry wants to have always new products with new performances and new specifications, which actually makes products always more artificial, less local, and more global. And this has, of course, some huge consequences in the way trades are transmitted from in a context.
I'm sorry, but he's not using the microphone. And now it's working.
No sé si traduciros o... Es que eres muy largo para traducir.
Yo creo que si contestas tú estará bien contestado.
No, no.
You should be the one to answer this question, I'm sure. We studied in the same school after all. I have a question. Yeah, it's working. But before I ask my question, I have something to say. Using, understanding, making new traditional architecture has been a lifesaver for me as an architect. I was very busy up until 2007, new buildings, but after that, restoration was my lifeline. So knowing about traditional architecture, working with different trades has actually saved my life, my professional life. Last night, yesterday, I attended an event at the School of Architecture. The presentation of European subsidies for architecture. Wonderful, I said. But most of those subsidies are to restore flats, buildings made with materials, with cement, with things that have nothing to do with traditional architecture. and the subsidies are supposed to be for traditional architecture. So then I asked a question, how can we benefit from these subsidies if we are in a rural setting? The answer was you would have to knock on other doors, different subsidies, not these funds. And I love what Alejandro does, and what the INTBAU group does. This is not an architecture from the past. This can perfectly be the architecture of the future. I live in a little village that receives lots of visitors thanks precisely to the architecture. Tourists come to see that architecture, not to see modern buildings or traditional ugly buildings, so we need to preserve it. But what's more, we need to come up with solutions so that these traits don't disappear. These techniques are preserved. Perhaps, by the way, I love that initiative, the network of artisans. Perhaps we don't manage to agree on specific solutions amongst ourselves. Of course, people are always on a rush, and they want things right now, and that plays against tradition. I know of no one who lives better in a flat than in a rehabilitated house or a restored house with old materials. I mean, I know of no one who prefers a flat than a traditional house properly restored. When I was into monument restoration, because there were no other exits. I mean, there were no other possibilities. This was back in '81. I had lots of children. I had studied with prestigious architects. But anyway, major architects told me, all of them, and I started with Roncesvalles. I was going to change the roofing there. And they told me, that's not important. That's insignificant. So there are many other factors, your enthusiasm, your love, knowledge, expertise. And then I realized that I needed more knowledge, and then I dove into that knowledge. I delved into that to find much more about it. I'm sorry, but his microphone is off. And what about materials? Are we making good use of materials? Yes, of course they're valuable. We know they're valuable, but of course we need to teach that at all levels. Schools of architecture, training schools for masons and other construction workers. I mean, we are trying. We are trying. I would love for my opinion to be taken into account. Not just receiving a document telling me what to do without having a say. I mean, legally that could be possible for qualified professionals to at least have the right to express their opinion. I'd like to share something with you in line with what Luis has just mentioned. We are here, after all, at the School of Architecture that trains future architects, those who will build and design houses in the future, in the short term. In my own particular case, historical woodwork or cabinet making, for many centuries it was based on a wooden structure that works, not just because I say it, but because they work. I mean, some of them are in perfect condition even after 1,000 years. And that's something that should be underlined. Do you have any subjects in this school focusing on mudéjar carpentry, considering that many monuments in Spain were built using that system? It would be ideal for future architects to be familiarized with those techniques. And then they would be able to decide whether to use them or not to mention other traditional trades or artisanal trades. Microphone, please. We have a stone cutting workshop here in this school. But of course, we've lost old masters who are now retired or no longer with us. In the case of wood, for instance, Henrique is no longer with us, and we can feel it because some people cannot be replaced. Perhaps we could find the right replacement for Henrique, but sometimes when one of those masters disappears, it has a huge impact on that particular field of expertise. Hello, in my opinion, there is something we should take into account. We have a trio: wood, stone, and iron, a marriage of three elements that never divorced, together with lime mortar, of course. From a traditional perspective, when we consider trades, a lime rendering, how beneficial it is for a house, considering energy savings, the prevention of water leaks, and so on and so forth. In your opinion, I mean, do you believe that this is the most suitable and the best kind of plaster we can use for a house? Okay, I'll try to answer this question, Santiago. It is something that we should consider from an environmental perspective, from the perspective of minimizing pollution. I mean, the pollution caused by modern building versus traditional buildings. I mean, traditional buildings use stone, wood, and earth. Materials which can consider, which do not pollute. They're not chemicals. They don't entail any processing or synthesis. And then on the other hand, traditional architecture in most cases uses local materials, materials that are close to the building. So transportation and logistics are not necessary because the materials are here. So we save a lot, we pollute less. And it's also true that traditional techniques have been used for a long time and have been perfected century after century. Thick walls for insulation against cold and heat. So traditional buildings have a lot to say when it comes to saving the planet. It was a very interesting question, by the way. Lime rendering. We are inspecting the walls to see if they're damaged by water or not. In Toledo, every house has a vault, and in the past they were covered in cement, and now we have to remove that cement because it's just full of water. You remove the cement. If you can apply a layer of lime, so much the better. But in some cases, the traditional, the original lime layer is enough. If you apply cement, you're suffocating the house. You don't let it breathe. A house is like a person, right? It has the same elements. If you cover it with concrete, with cement, it no longer breathes. So what about shingles? I mean, we have very modern ones. They're called self-ventilating. And however, we have lots of traditional roofs that worked perfectly well with shingles, and using mud for roofings versus modern materials, corrugated sheets and so on and so forth, are so much better. From the perspective of those who live in those buildings, who tell you about that, we have a crawl space or a ventilation chamber below the shingles in traditional buildings. However, in modern buildings, we don't have that. We just used shingles, and we believe that shingles are going to ventilate everything. And I can show you this before any doubt. Because of course, people know about you. It's the word of mouth. And they call you when they have a leak to repair the roof. I mean, it's so much easier to replace shingles than to replace modern materials. I mean, the advantages are huge. I could give you a long list of advantages. The natural properties of local materials are unbeatable. We're not reinventing the wheel, we're not inventing anything, we're just using things that have been used for many centuries. The knowledge we have is just like the starting out point. It's not that what we know is the best, but our starting point is unbeatable because we have 500, 1,000 years behind us, right? 1,000 years of experience, of proven performance. Structures that work, that we know work after so many centuries. But of course, on the other hand, we have trade interests, which are legitimate, I guess, but we're getting it wrong, in my opinion. We're not doing things right. Hopefully I've answered your question. I mean, traditional techniques, traditional rendering techniques work. They do work. It's been proven beyond any doubt that they work, that they do perform, as they've been performing for so many centuries. The largest cement manufacturer in the world recommends the use of lime. They've just opened up the largest lime quarry in the world in Paris, in the Paris region. Just to let you know. Okay, we have time for one last question. I find it a bit strange that no one has mentioned politics or politicians. I'm going to mention them. I'm sorry, but the microphone is no longer working.
Sobre esto, es que yo creo que realmente...
So, we couldn't hear the question, I'm sorry. I don't really know if the free market is in action today. What we have are huge incentive for some technologies. Traditional technologies, on the other hand, techniques are highly competitive. If we actually lived in a free market, we would see an actual change. But in many senses, we don't live in a free market. If you have a very large company, of course, you can present awards for specific things you're interested in. I would love to wrap things up on a positive tone, right? I would like to draw hopeful, positive conclusions. And I'd like to mention something that Javier Carrajal used to talk about. He used to be a professor here. And this was a long time ago, before he passed, of course. he used to say that this was back in the 70s. The internal combustion engine was a decision, the result of a decision that was taken in the past because the UK had oil, the US had oil, there was oil there. So, of course, an internal combustion engine was much more in line with their interests and resources than electrical motors. So the internal combustion engine was chosen. Now we've come to the realization that it was not the best possible decision. It can be considered as a mistake. We're now betting on a different engine, an electrical motor. If we had 100 years behind us with using electrical motors, we would now have wonderful, high-performing motors, right? And this is also very clear when we read technical codes, things that are subsidized, things that are actually promoted, and things that you can't actually use because there are many obstacles. I mean, who drafts those codes? Politicians, right? In the past, we used the Neufer. But now, if you follow the technical code, you will fall down the stairs. The handrail, the height of the handrail, everything, the steps, they make no sense. What is lacking is common sense and informed opinions and expertise when we talk about politics, right? But thank you very much.
Muchas gracias. Muchas gracias a todos los asistentes.
Thank you to all participants for your very interesting questions. Okay, we will continue the conference tomorrow. We'll start at 9:30. We'll finish slightly later than today, 1:30. But we will follow the same scheme. Once again, I would like to invite you to join the INTBAU as a member. You can apply for membership at both the INTBAU website or the Spanish INTBAU website. So I'll see you tomorrow again. Thank you.